prophet in 1 Kings 20. Who thinks he's wrong in what he did?
You better believe it. He's a liar.
Okay. Verse 35. By the word of the Lord, one of the sons of the prophet said to his companion, "Strike me with your weapon." But the man refused. So the prophet said, "Because you have not obeyed the Lord, as soon as you leave me, a lion will kill you." And after the man went away, a lion found him and killed him. The prophet found another man and said, "Strike me, please." So the man struck him and wounded him. Then the prophet went and stood by the road, waiting for the king. He disguised himself with his headband down over his eyes. As the king passed by, the prophet called out to him, "Your servant went into the thick of the battle, and someone came to me with a captive and said, 'Guard this man. If he is missing, it will be your life for his life, or you must pay a talent of silver.' And while your servant was busy here and there, the man disappeared. 'This is your sentence,' the king of Israel said. 'You have pronounced it yourself.' Then the prophet quickly removed the headband from his eyes. The king of Israel recognized him as one of the prophets. They were hard not to recognize. The scourge of Israel, they were always after Israel's kings. He said to the king, 'This is what the Lord says. You have set a free man I had determined should die. You have set free a man I had determined should die. Therefore it is your life for his life, your people for his people.' Sullen and angry, the king of Israel went to his palace in Samaria." Okay, we're not going to really argue this, but we're going to just work our way through it. Verse 35, by the word of the Lord. So the Lord is behind the prophet. Of course, we could then argue, but then he might have strayed somewhere down the road. But still, the Lord starts off behind the prophet. We have a very interesting set of circumstances he wants to put himself through to prove a point to the king. Trying to find someone who will strike him, and one who doesn't, actually it costs him his life. Which is, yes, very bad. But he somehow must have gone against the Lord or the Lord's word, because no one man could pronounce another man's death or predict it so accurately unless the Lord is party to that. So God must have desired for this prophet to have been hit by this other man or stricken in some fashion. So he finds another man in verse 37. And he said, "Strike me," and he struck him and wounded him. So he actually is wounded. He's not pretending anything if he's sitting beside the road somewhere. He's actually wounded. Then the prophet went and stood by the road waiting for the king. He disguised himself with his headband down over his eyes. Okay, just pulled it down over his face like pulling your hat down so people wouldn't know who you were whenever they came by. As the king passed by, the prophet called out to him and gives him this little parable, saying that we were in war and I had a captive that I had to watch. And generally in war, and we see this even over in Paul's journeys in the book of Acts, that it was a life for a life. If you had a captive that was your responsibility to watch, then for him to escape would mean your death. And so he gives him this little parable, and the king pronounces correctly, "This is your sentence. You've pronounced it yourself. That is, you'll have to die." The prophet quickly removed the headband from his eyes, and the king of Israel recognized him as one of the prophets. And he said, "This is what the Lord says to you. You have set free a man that I had determined should die," which you'll find here in the earlier part of the chapter, that God had delivered Israel's enemy into her hand, and yet the old, weak, vacillating king who wants to curry favor with everyone allowed the enemy to go free. And it's, of course, a lesson intended to teach this king a thing or two. Of course, the king is sullen and angry, and he goes to his palace in Samaria. Well, I think I'll answer right away whether or not he was right or wrong by coming to our big Roman numeral 3. Now, I would recommend that you find your Roman numerals and your points under them and get them on a separate piece of paper before we're through with all of this. These are the things that will help keep everything clear and differentiated in your mind, most of all. We started off with a Roman numeral 1 concerning the extent of what you say, a Roman numeral 2 concerning actions. Then we had points underneath that: misrepresentation, pretension, You don't always have to tell all that you know and all of that. And I gave it to you. I've given it to you, and it's on your outline that you have with your ethics notes anyway. And put the best appropriate scripture by that from one of the examples here in the Bible. And I think it will help you remember it a lot better. Okay, here's what I want you to write for Roman numeral 3. Certain peculiar and dramatic forms of acting, writing, and speaking are exempt from any problems of duplicity. And we will have an A and a B under this. And all we're going to look at this morning is an A. Certain peculiar and dramatic forms of acting, writing, and speaking are exempt from any problems of duplicity. Now, of course, I would put 1 Kings chapter 20 under this third point. I think that this episode and this man, of course, are exempt from any problems of falsehood or lying here because of how I've just explained it. Certain peculiar, dramatic forms of acting, writing, and speaking are exempt from any problems of duplicity. So, let's ask ourselves this question. We'll give ourselves, let's go ahead and give ourselves an A, first of all. We'll deal with acting, and then we'll deal with writing and speaking together as our point B. Now here's where we're going to start tying together a lot of the things that we've already looked at thus far. And a lot of illustrations and examples that I've given you. Some of them I've just thought up spur of the moment whenever I was up here. And I've said, well, we'll either come back to this, or this really fits under another case, or we'll develop this more. Because we want to be careful to go far enough in our critique of falsehood, but we don't want to go too far. Let's discuss, first of all, this morning, the subject of disguise. Now, we had one of our arguments, it's probably been a few weeks, maybe a month or so ago. We got into the business of what I call the roof and the well. Rahab and the men on the roof and the men in the well. The roof and the well episode, trying to find out who thought that was right and who thought that was wrong. And someone, not in making a point, not in stating this as, number 2 or 3 or 6 or 7 as a point under one side, but it just came out in his discussion of his argument, the fact of wearing a mask, wearing a disguise. And one of the sisters in the church, it was the day we had a love feast, came up afterwards and she said, well then what would be the difference between wearing a disguise and David's feigning himself to be mad back there in 1 Samuel, where David in fact is really not mad, but he's feigning himself to be mad. And what would be the difference, let's say, rather than David feigning himself mad, that he put on some disguise so that the Philistines there didn't recognize who he was and he could escape? What would be the difference between those two things? And my response to her was, there is no difference. Both of them are wrong. Both the disguise, if David would have put on some disguise, because feigning yourself to be mad is in fact a disguise. It's just not a mask that we would think of a false mustache or beard or hair or wig or something like that. Now, Rahab with the 2 spies and the men in the well, the roof and the well episode. If you can remember, and you can think back that far, who here was originally on the side of thinking those things were wrong? If you remember. You might not remember that they were wrong. Okay, we want to come back to that again and try to tie that in what we're looking at. It's going to apply to what we're talking about here with with Joshua, what we finished last time, and a lot of other things as well. Now we looked there, in looking at that, at Jesus hiding, especially over in John's Gospel, where he actually hid. And of course the big argument there is that somehow there's pretension, there's misrepresentation involved. Somehow if a well doesn't normally have men living inside of it during the middle of the day, and two men go down in there when someone is after them, they're obviously practicing some form of falsehood or duplicity. And our conclusion to that was, in fact, no, they're not necessarily practicing some form of falsehood or duplicity. So let me give you this sentence in that will kind of sum up what we've studied there before. And I apologize if it kind of sounds disjointed as we go through this, because there are so many things I want to cover and say in the next hour we have. Okay, get as much of this down as you can, though. You cannot pretend not to be at a place where you are, because you have to be there in order to pretend that you're not. Right? You cannot pretend not to be at a place where you are. We're talking about hiding now. You cannot pretend not to be at a place where you are, because you have to be there to pretend that you're not. Therefore, in fact, by hiding, you couldn't pretend that you're not there, but that you are. I'll give you the whole thing again. You cannot pretend not to be at a place where you are, because you have to be there to pretend that you're not. Therefore, by hiding, you could not pretend that you're not there, but that you are. Because we were asking ourselves the question there, what about if it comes down to us? If we need to hide from someone? This business of hiding Jews in Nazi Germany is not so off the wall after all. That's one of the chief problems that you keep running into, is the subject of persecutors, persecution, hiding, fleeing, disguise. When and where are things allowed and lines drawn with occasions like that? You cannot pretend not to be at a place where you are, because you have to be there to pretend that you're not. The only one who can do the pretending that they're not there is the one that's there. So you couldn't pretend that you're not there if you are there, because a person who's not there couldn't be there to pretend that they're not there. Well, that was too long, you say. Well, that's why I gave it to you in a sentence form. I didn't want to just start talking and arguing, because I know I would go all forever and you'd never get anything down probably, because it's a lot of twisting in and out to make sure that we have it down. Do I need to give it to you again? You cannot pretend not to be at a place where you are, because you have to be there to pretend you're not. You have to think up some other thing besides pretending or misrepresenting. In other words, can you misrepresent the fact that you're really not in New York City this morning? You can't or that you are there. Well, you can't misrepresent the fact that you are there unless you're there to misrepresent the fact that you're there. And so there's no way that you could do something like that. Therefore, by hiding, you couldn't pretend that you're not there, but that you are. There are two manners of being anywhere, manifestly and secretly. Only two ways to be in any place. You're either there in the open or you're there in secret. If you're not there in the open, then your persecutors have two options. They may assume that either you are not there or that you are there and that you are hiding. There are two manners of being in any place, manifestly and secretly. If you're there manifestly, then that's all there is to it. Your persecutors come after you and they see you standing there, that's the end. What if it's secret? Well, if they don't see you whenever they come, such as the Joshua account with Rahab, or the account of the men in the well, or the account of you hiding in the back of a car or something trying to escape your persecutors, if you're not just right there in the open, then they have two options in their mind. They can pick one or the other, or they could follow out both. But they have two options. Either the person for whom they're looking is not present, or they are present, but in a hidden, secret fashion. Therefore, for you to fulfill the second of those two options, that is secretly, and the second of those two, that is, you're not just not there, but you're there in a hidden fashion, is not to practice any deceit at all actively. Because the people who are after you have two choices. They can choose that you are there and hidden, or that you're not there. Now, you've seen on any television show or movie or whatever you might have seen in the past, a group of people looking for a person. They come in the house and look all around. And they either look around for a long period of time or a short period of time. They'll leave the house sometimes assuming the person's not there, assuming the person is somewhere else, and go and try to find them there. Or they continue looking. Now, the person can be there, and they're being hidden while they're there doesn't imply that they're not there. Because you're there, and you couldn't imply that you're not there if you're there. Therefore, what you are capitalizing on is the fact that your followers, your persecutors, have either not looked long enough or have chosen the wrong of two options, the incorrect of two options. You're not doing anything but staying out of view. It's up to your captors to either find you or leave from there. What you're banking on is they're not going to find you. What you're banking on is they're not going to be diligent enough to search you out. You're not going to deceive them in any way. You're simply hiding. You're not doing anything. There's no way that we could say that you couldn't find a big box and get in it and put a bunch of clothes on top of you. Because you're just there. You're not doing anything. All they have to do is come and lift the box open, dig down in it, and find you if they want to. You're banking on the fact they're going to look, not look hard enough, going to leave, and they're going to think that you're somewhere else. Therefore, that means that you can hide scripturally. Then a person would ask, is this misrepresenting your real presence by pretending your absence? No, because you are not necessarily saying, I'm not here. Because one who is there could not say, I'm not here. You're saying the choice is up to you. You must determine, I'm either not here or hiding. And this person could well imply, I am here, which is really the only thing that he can imply. By his presence, he has to imply that he's present. I am here, but I will not allow you to find me. Now, there is a significant place where what we have in Joshua's account, well, the people should have thought better. The elders of Ai, they should have recognized that. A difference between something like that and when we have the roof and the well episode. Some of you remember faulted those people in the roof and the well episode. But if we fault hiding, which I don't think any of us do now, but as you're listening to what I'm saying, these moral questions may still be surfacing in your mind because you keep having these little twinges of this, that, or the other. But now wait a minute, what if you were in a box and you were covered with clothes? Aren't you somehow deceiving someone else? Well, not necessarily. Remember the episode of Jesus. If he's fleeing from them in the temple, he either can stand out in the open and he would imply, here I am. You wouldn't have to imply it, it's obvious. Or he could hide behind a post, and he can only imply that I'm hiding behind a post. By hiding behind the post, he couldn't imply that he's not there. He would have to not be there to imply that he's not there. And if one, in fact, was not there, he would have no need of implying that he wasn't there. And the people following him have two options. Either he's hiding behind a post. He's not going to just be standing out in the open. In other words, that's so obvious that obviously they have two options in their mind, and they're expected to choose one or both of those and follow them out. Either Jesus is gone and we just cannot catch him, he's gone, or he's here somewhere and he's hiding. Now, if we fault hiding, then there's almost no limit to what you can bar with that form of reasoning. That's why I would definitely steer far away from faulting hiding. Because if you fault hiding, if you say that that's wrong to do that, there's almost no limit to what you can restrict with just that form of reasoning. Of course, the roof and the well episodes would both be morally wrong and incorrect then for something like that to be done. But if that is wrong, then so is the children's game, sometimes played by adults, of hide and go seek. Now, this was something brought up to me before, and I said I want to tie all this together in one message and get these loose ends together. Now, I think we generally run the words together so quickly it sounds like hiding, go seek, hiding, go seek. But it's hide and go seek. Now, can you do that as a Christian? Pardon? Or, well, would you think not? Because they know that you're hiding. Well, yes, that would appear very obvious. But you see what the problem would be if we hammered too hard against lying and too much in favor of truthfulness here, then if you're a thinking person at all, these things surface to your mind right away. And that means if you bar hiding, you can bar almost anything then. If you bar hiding, if you go too far on the truthfulness side, that almost means that if you know someone's after you, you've got to call them up on the telephone, tell them you'll meet them at their house just to make sure that you don't do anything wrong. And you see, that's obviously not scriptural. We've got to find a balance here, seeing how far we can go. The Joshua case of Joshua leaving the city, now you see, there he's actively doing something. He's leading the people away. He would be well within his rights, as was proven with the ambush, to simply hide beside the road, wait till some of the chief elders come out the next day and grab them and hold them as hostage to get in the city or something. You could hide. You can hide in any way you want to hide. But you can't lure the people out of the city. Lure them away feigning a retreat, feigning a defeat, whenever it's really not a defeat at all. Well, we touched on this issue before concerning the out of doors. What about the snaring of animals? What about fishing? What about pretending to throw a ball to a dog when you really hide it behind your back? Now, if you remember these illustrations, this goes back to like the first or second teaching in ethics. This goes back so far. Back over 2 years ago that I mentioned that to you and got all of you thinking, and it gets you real hyper, real tense then. You don't know whether you could, throw, how you do, you throw it, and you want the dog to look like a fool running and looking all around, and you hide it over here behind your back, you really throw it over here in another direction. Well, see, obviously you're pretending something, you're misrepresenting something, you misrepresented the fact that you threw it by not throwing it, you pretended as though you threw it, you really didn't throw it. The snaring of animals, you're pretending like this nice little rabbit's path is just a regular, normal rabbit's path. There is no loop and twine and string on the ground and then leaves on top of that and then an old sapling bent over beside the trail. It's just a nice rabbit's trail. And what happens when you fish? Say you're fishing with real bait. You throw in a nice chump or a nice minnow. But that's not a real minnow, though. I mean, he's real that he's a minnow, but he's an unusual minnow. Let's say that he's caught in a strange situation. He's got a hook through him. And you're intending for the other fish to think that this is just a regular minnow. Because most of us don't. I did it once because the fish were wild. They would bite on an empty hook. But most of us don't just throw hooks in and try to catch fish that way. We misrepresent the fact. We pretend that this is a minnow that doesn't have a hook. And then, of course, it could even be worse if you use artificial bait, an old stale plastic worm or crawdad or something. And we're intending for that big bass not only to think that this is a real crawdad or a real worm, which in fact it's not, but that it's a real one without a hook in it. It's a twofold deception of the fish then. Or if you go hunting, you wear animal scent. Most men don't smell like animals, except on certain days of the week or times of the day. So if you rub animal scent on you when you go hunting, or you darken your face to go after turkeys when you normally don't have a dark face, well, you just see, we could just go on and on and on with these illustrations. But they fit right here under number 3. Certain peculiar and dramatic forms of acting are exempt from any problems of duplicity. Not only do we have certain peculiar forms of acting here, but we have things that don't actively involve any moral evil. As far as hiding from your child is concerned, it obviously is a game. In other words, what I'm saying here is certain types of games like that, they don't fall in the moral area. They fall in an amoral. They're not moral, they're not immoral, they're amoral. Therefore, you could certainly go and hide. You could even feign a retreat and everything if it's a game that you're all playing. No one's life is at stake, no morals are involved, it's just a game that'll be over with at the end of the day. See, we've got to make these lines of distinction, or we're going to just bar everything from happening. We couldn't do anything. Whenever you sell a car, I was asked this as well. Now, do you have to tell everything that's wrong with it? Well, not everything, because you're going to have to go to the world's leading mechanic and a physicist and just about everyone to check the tension of the steel in the car and everything to find as many things wrong. I bet you could find probably, if you went to the technical experts, maybe 10,000 things wrong with your car. You'd have to report that. Well, that obviously is stupid and not required. But if she drinks oil like you drink water, then you can't say never a drop of oil goes through this car. That's something that's very wrong with the car, and the person that's going to buy the car needs to be made aware of that. Now, if there's a little thing missing here or missing there, no, I don't think you have to report everything that's wrong. Again, think of what's a moral evil. Are you trying to trick that person to buy a dump? Or is the car fairly good, or it is a dump, and you've told them it's a dump, but you're not going to tell them all the things that are wrong with the car, every little chip and dent and every record from service maintenance on it and so forth. You see, we'd so tie our hands and bind ourselves, we couldn't get anything done in life if we have to report like that. As far as fishing is concerned, I don't think any moral evil is involved there. We are actively seeking to deceive the animals, but I think it fits in another area besides Christian truthfulness. And it's interesting, and I think I pointed this out a little earlier, that God has even made the animal kingdom in this fashion. In other words, if we had to compete with animals, those of us who've ever gone hunting or gone fishing, if you have to compete with animals and fish on their own turf, you're going to lose all the time. I mean, God has made them in such a way that if you don't use snares, if you don't use scent, if you don't... I mean, what do you do when you go deer hunting? Do you just stand somewhere and hope all the deer around see you? Or do you hide as best as you can? You try to trick the deer, trick the fish, trick all the animals is exactly what you're doing. But I well remember that morning that I mentioned fishing and everyone got real tense, like, this is a moral evil. Because you think deceit is involved. Yes, deceit is involved, but it's not a moral deceit. It's a deceit that fits in another area entirely. Man has dominion over the animal creation, but I think he would be terribly unsuccessful, very unable to survive off of them if he operated with them in their territory and on their terms. The only way you're going to beat them at their game is to use your mind. And that's what God has given us over them. Think of now we're not so dependent on that anymore as we were at one time, but think of the older civilizations that were dependent on catching animals or killing animals for their food. Now, the way they did it was with elaborate snares and traps and retreats and guises and feigning just about everything. And you find some hunters will go to a lot of extent today. And the clothes that you wear, they hang their clothes outside months before deer season so it smells like outside. You rub scent on you. That's not really you. You go fishing, you use all types of elaborate artificial baits, And just by virtue of the fact that you've got a real bait with a hook in it, you're tricking the fish. But are we going to really catch many fish just by throwing a hook in the water? No. Are we going to catch very many fish by throwing minnows in the water without hooks attached to them? No, you're just feeding the fish then. So how are you going to get the fish? Most fish are not in a place where you can get in there and go after them with your hands and feet, get an army of people and try to, you just won't do that. Snares and fishing are actually practiced right in the Scriptures. Remember, snares and fishing are used there. And not just the fishing of the apostles where so often it's by net. There, I guess we could argue no deceit involved. They're just dragging the net, and the fish can see the net, and it's just too bad because they're not going to get past the net. But actually with pole and line and hook are spoken of in Scripture as well. Peter was told to cast a hook into the water. The first fish on it, bring him up. I doubt it was a bare hook. Fish don't bite on bare hooks, except dumb ones. I did find one place where I caught them on bare hooks, but they were starved. They had hit anything that hit the water, and you just throw hooks in. But most of the time, fish don't bite on that. You're going to have to trick the fish to get him in.
For the continuation of
You're going to have to trick the fish to get him in. You're going to have to operate on their territory at your level of thinking. Man has been given dominion over the animals, and man has to use his mind. So hopefully, if you've ever wondered about that, we will free you from those problems. The animal is being sought, then it's his responsibility to hide and to run and to elude his seekers as much as possible. Now, so that answers the question before about playing with children. Yes, you can play games with children, games of hide-and-go-seek, games of feigning that you're defeated so they can all pile on top of you and then you can get the mastery over them or whatever. Because that fits here under certain peculiar and dramatic forms of action that really don't involve that at all. We're back here to 1 Kings 20. Yes, he doesn't really feign his illness, but yes, he feigns the fact. He tells a lie here. He said, in fact, that I was delivered a captive to me, and I was supposed to watch him, and I let him escape. Well, no such thing happened. He made that whole story up. But there's nothing wrong with making up a story like that that proves the point and fits in a certain case here. Now, do you understand that? You can't lie to someone. Lying is wrong. This is not lying here, though. With him looking like he's defeated, he's been in battle, even though some of that is not necessarily disguised. When he has been wounded, he just pulls his headband down over his eyes. He's pretending as though he's been in a battle, because that's part of the parable there, that he's been in a battle. He's pretending that he's been in a battle. We have no problem with that. No duplicity or prevarication or falsehood involved here at all, because I think it's an exemption. Fits under our Roman numeral 3 here. Now, notice that I said, yes, we are allowed to actively seek to deceive animals. Anyone have a problem with that? If you do, I'll go into it even more. We have the right, because morals are not involved there, to actively deceive animals. You won't get them, believe me. You won't get them if you don't actively deceive them. You go try to get a deer on his territory, and just walk right out there and carry as much human sin as possible. Sit right on his trail and look for him, or go to the fish and coax them into the boat. Ask them when they come in and get in your freezer. See what they'll do. No, you're not going to get anything out there unless you practice deceit on the animal kingdom. So, you can actively trick the animals. However, we may not actively seek to deceive other human beings when it's outside of this business of peculiar dramatic action, which we might call games. Now, here's where we've got a big difference between the roof and the well episode. It's passive. These are terms to remember. It's passive. They go down in there, they do nothing. It's the responsibility of their persecutors to search everywhere for them. It's not they're after them. It's for their life. If they can't hide, then the only option they have is fleeing, and if for some reason they couldn't flee, then their duty, they'd be bound to do this, is to stand up and announce, here's my presence. Well, that's just not part of the business of hide and go seek whenever it's for your life. The person has the responsibility, they have the right to passively, and I'll even use this word because I'm using it in this context, to passively trick or deceive his persecutors. Actively tricking or deceiving would not be allowed. There is a difference between capitalizing on someone else's delusion and creating it. There is a difference between between capitalizing on someone else's delusion and creating it. Remember, if you are the one being sought, those seeking you, and you're not out in the open, have two options in their mind. Either the person is not here, or they are here and they are hidden. If they choose to think that you're not here, that's their own choice. You're simply capitalizing on their delusion, their failure to walk over to the well, which obviously would be a very nice place to hide, big enough to put some men down in there, to walk over into the well and look in it. You're capitalizing on their own delusion, lack of preparation or lack of search. There's a difference between capitalizing on someone else's delusion and creating it. In Joshua 8, the delusion is created by Joshua's feigned retreat. The illustration given earlier, you're fleeing to Maine. You're talking to a friend on the phone. You know that persecutors have your lines bugged. And so what you say is, I'm going to Buffalo. Even if, in fact, you do go to Buffalo, you're creating the delusion in their mind. Therefore, if something happens providentially somewhere along the line that they get in their mind, by nothing that you did actively anyway, they get in their mind that you're going to Buffalo or to New York, you're under no obligation to go inform them that they're wrong about that. I mean, that would be stupid to go and do that. As long as you yourself didn't create the delusion that you're going somewhere else, even if in fact you do go first. If that comes into their mind somehow later on, let them think it all they want to. You're capitalizing on their own delusion. And if we say that we have to go inform them that they're wrong, then we would also have to conclude, whenever those people left the courtyard and they failed to look in the well, you'd have to jump out of the well and say, listen, you're wrong. You're choosing the wrong option to think I'm somewhere else. I'm really down here. And we know that that's wrong. Therefore, if they have a delusion, if God has worked a delusion, if circumstances have worked a delusion in their mind, let it stay. If you can capitalize on it, capitalize on it. Now we're outside of games here. Now we're into moral problems. But if you can capitalize on their self-created or circumstance-created delusion, and capitalize on it. But don't create the delusion in their mind. There is where we would be morally guilty. With me so far?
Yes.
Does it all sound right so far? Okay, back to our third point here, dramatic action. The prophet of 1 Kings 20 did create the delusion in the king's mind. But it was temporary and amoral. No harm is done. It's no problem. It's a game, in other words. Therefore, back to another illustration given earlier. What if you're going to the store to buy a surprise for someone in the family? They find out about it or are suspicious about it, and so you say, well, what I'm going to get is some notebook paper. And you do buy notebook paper. You'd have to if you said that you're going to get that. You'd have to do that. You do go buy notebook paper. Then you buy the surprise. Well, see, that doesn't fit in the same case as the Buffalo deal. Here all we have is a game. Maybe it's a surprise you want to pull on someone. Here all we have is a game, It's all moral. You're going to tell them the facts of the matter here within a few days or few hours at most anyway.
So your party was okay.
Yes, it was okay. That is my next point. You probably could have done a lot more than you did. My wife and the other ringleaders in that episode, this welcome back party from seminary, and after you've been there, you do need a welcome back party. Yes, it is simply a game. And you could probably employ, scripturally, a lot more strategy to trick, to deceive, to mislead, because it's all moral. It does me no harm, does no one else any harm, and I'm going to find out in a few days, weeks, or months anyway. Should I told you before? Yes, you see, if you start faulting that, then you got to fault playing hide and go seek with your children. You got to fault so many things. You got to fault fishing. We've got to draw a line somewhere. When it fits here under 3A, that's why we put this as a whole study in itself, a whole section itself. Anything you can fit as a game here, then put it as a game right here. There's no moral, evil, right or wrong involved here. You're not really trying to trick someone for their harm or your harm or anyone's harm. But in fact, if you don't play according to the rules of trick and deceit, you'll have no game. That would destroy the game. And of course, some people could argue for that. Well, you can involve yourself in nothing that involves any form of trickery or deceit. But then I'd say, what are we going to do with 1 Kings 20 then? What are we going to do with some other episodes we'll look at later? We'd have problems with these in the Bible. You see, if I just let all of you run wild way back at the beginning of truthfulness, you'd come up with all different types of answers of what you could and couldn't do. That's why I couldn't do that. I have to give you these 1, 2, 3, 4 points, and you find out what the episodes are, what the situations are, and find where you put them here. Some of you'd want to fault too much, and some of you wouldn't fault enough. And there are very fine lines of distinction here. I recognize that. But I think that the lines of distinction are also fairly easy to understand. I did want to make a big deal about persecution, though, because the church has been involved in that. I'm talking about the church in general through history. Our church has been involved in that, and I'm sure it will be in the future. We have to know what is allowed of us. We can capitalize on someone else's misunderstanding of the situation. We can hide. We can try to get away from them as quickly and as much as possible. But we can't create something in their mind, making them think we're somewhere else. If they already think it, let them think it then. That's their problem. And if we're under an obligation to go inform them they're wrong, then we're back to the well. You've got to jump out and tell them, come back and get me. So you have to draw these lines somewhere. Now, I noticed in the latest scholarly publication by the Mennonite Church, the Mennonite Quarterly Review, Theological Journal, this was the January 87. They had a couple of interesting articles in here. Now, the Mennonites came from the Anabaptists back right around Tyndale's time. We've talked about them before. They come in the early 1500s. The Mennonites, of course, are opposed to taking an oath. They believe very strongly in truthfulness. And as a result, they have found themselves in sticky situations through history. And this article by Beck, beginning on page 58, is entitled Mennonite Trickster Tales, True to Be Good. Let me read a few sections of this. Because you see, they have a doctrine, and as part of their doctrinal belief of the Mennonite Church is truthfulness, total truthfulness. But yet they've gotten caught in sticky situations, and they've found very elaborate ways to get out of them, which are so elaborate, I think they involve lying and deceit. But you see, if you're bound doctrinally to truthfulness, then you can't ever tell a lie. But you can get the people so confused, and you're doing it actively, that in fact, in essence, what you're doing is lying to them. And these stories are just hilarious to read about Mennonite pastors who get stopped for speeding, and they claim, it's just incredible. I remember some of the stories here, but not all of them. Just incredible, some of the stories that have been told by Mennonites. They get together in little groups and they actually tell trickster tales to one another, how they employed what they would call strategy to escape. American Mennonites nurture a tradition of trickster narratives that is apparently unique in this denominational ethnic group. Traceable to the origins of Mennonites in Western Europe 460 years ago, The tradition may derive from their historic refusal to swear oaths and their concomitant emphasis on truth-telling in everyday affairs. Apparently, their trickster stories reflect and vindicate the strategies that Mennonites resort to in order to survive in a world where absolute truth-telling remains impractical and at times even life-threatening. And then it just goes on. You see, I've got it all marked up because it goes on and on. It said, now in the real world, absolute truthfulness, that's impractical. But yet we're bound to it doctrinally. So the only way to get around that is what they call these Mennonite trickster tales. Well, you see, I fault them. They've got a correct doctrine, but they don't hold themselves to their doctrine. We fault other people. They don't even have this doctrine. But in essence, if you've got the doctrine and don't hold to it, you're all in the same camp. You both lie. Whether you have the doctrine or not, what do you do in practice? We've got to have this doctrine, but not have these Mennonite trickster tales here. Now, we can have the Pauline trickster tales of escaping in a basket over the wall and things like that. But without going into it, because could take forever just reading that, we can't have the type of episodes they have where outright lying is involved, but you word it in such a way that it could kind of partially be true also. It's kind of partially true and kind of partially wrong, and you're wanting the person to believe that which is true about it, so they don't know the other thing about it. Of course, I think that's going too far. Let me cover another episode that has been brought up by two people in the past, and that concerns about a year ago when I came on a Wednesday night and announced that the church was stopping. Now, I had someone come to me after that and felt that I lied because we started right back up. And then I had someone else come to me after that, way after that, which was not long ago from now, who just wanted to know what was going on there. Now, in fact, I had talked with some of the people here in the church the Tuesday night before that, and had actually told them that we were going to stop the church, but we were going to start the church back up again. I didn't set any time limits on when we were going to start it back up, but we were going to start it back up again. So that means that whenever I stopped the church, I stopped it with full intention of starting it up, with full intention of everyone here in the church not really thinking that I was going to start it back up. Therefore, where do we put something like this? We put it under 3A here, dramatic action. Dramatic action where you announce that something is going to be done, and really you're going to reverse it, and you already have planned to reverse it later on. But what if you tell everyone that we're going to stop, but I'm going to reverse this in a couple of days, though? Well then, so what? You just take a vacation. It doesn't have any effect at all. It has an effect if you think this is the end. It's dramatic action that is reversed within a few weeks, within a few days, as a matter of fact, and everyone finds out about it in the long run. So if you've ever wondered about that episode, and at least two people here have, maybe you haven't thought of it, but at least two people have thought of it, there's a good explanation of it. Now, it can also fit in two other areas, but in going back over that in my mind and trying to remember just what was happening then, that is at least one of the areas that I would place it in. I would place it also in the other area that I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. I kind of thought that we would stop for a while and start back up, but I wasn't certain on that. In other words, I was going to not only let you wait, but let me wait a few days and kind of see what transpired as a result of that. That'll fit under another case we'll get to as point 4. We'll still have a B to cover under 3, then we'll be to a Roman numeral 4, which is where this will stop. Now, I only have one other thing that I think of. We got through all of this quickly here. And it goes back to children again. But I practice this, and someone was at our house the other day whenever I practiced it, and I just wanted to make sure that they understood it and that everyone else understands this as well. I sometimes create false thoughts in my children's minds if I want to get them to do something. For instance, and you see, all of us have done it many times. We might not be willing to admit it. But many times, and this was the episode the other day, younger children are wanting to go upstairs. So I say there are bears up there. The bears will come out of the closet and bite you if you go up there. Well, they come lickety-split down those stairs in a hurry then. Now, whenever they go, then I asked them, I said, are there really any bears up there? They said, no, bears only live outside on the top of the mountains. They know there are no bears in there. But it's enough of a game, and they believe enough of that game, that I can control them by that. Now, again, I put that in this dramatic action business. It's a certain form of peculiar and dramatic action that's outside of any duplicity. However, we can't go too far with this in just making everything a fantasy and a fairy tale so that all they think is non-reality. You have to be careful. They know enough of reality to know, and if you ask them, bears don't live in our house, no bears live in the closet, they live only outside on the top of the mountain. But if you ask them to open that closet when it's dark, they won't open it though. So you see, they know one thing, but yet they've been taught another thing as well. Now, if you think, well, now, maybe is that going to make them afraid of the dark whenever they grow up or something? Well, it seems like everyone's born afraid of the dark anyway. I mean, people just don't volunteer to plunge into a dark room and dig around in a dark closet unless you have a very lively child who likes to tackle monsters and unseen things. Besides that, I think in a Christian home you can educate them enough about fear, about darkness, about light, about truth, that it will present no problem at all. If you have a problem with it, then I would recommend you not practice that form of instruction or getting your children to do what you want them to do. Practice something else. But I haven't found it to present any difficulties at all because the truth is certainly understood by them. But many times I tell them a story, part of a story, to get them to think about something, which would fit down under writing and speaking. We can cover a whole thing there. Could you just make up a story and tell it to one of your children? Well, why not? Well, wouldn't that be lying to them? Well, isn't this a lie here in 1 Kings 20? He wasn't in a battle. He lied that he was. Well, not really. It was to prove a point, to make a point. Again, don't go too far. Don't just sit around and tell fairy tales all the time. I think there's a balance here that has to be maintained. You may have heard how I've been really enjoying teaching my children Bible stories by telling them the stories. Well, the narrative in the Bible only gives us so much. I don't know whether he stabbed me with his left hand or right hand, but if I'm going to act it out, I've got to make a choice between left and right hand. So I don't know how much of that really didn't happen in the biblical account and how much it did. But I don't think I'm creating a false sense of what happened there. I'm just adding in whatever details might have taken place during that time to allow them to know what was taking place. The story is much more meaningful then. They have the bare narrative. They have a few details in there as well. For instance, we've gone over Cain and Abel. They love that story that my little girl says that Abel got real killed whenever Cain killed him. He got real killed. I don't know how you get real killed versus killed, but he got real killed. Well, we don't know how he got killed, but we do know that they wanted to go out in the field together. If you get the correct manuscripts there, Cain says, let's go in the field and talk. They go and talk. Probably it was either, I doubt it was by strangulation, probably either by knife or maybe a stone crushed his head. So I've told the story both ways. You get Abel out there and Cain with this big knife in his hand and plunges it right into Abel's belly. Or he gets Abel to turn around in another direction. You pick up a big stone and smash it on his head. Now when you do that and you pick up a big stone and you're there in the living room or bedroom and they watch you, their eyes are just like saucers, you know, because they can see what happens. We don't really need that. I mean, we know he died. But, well, how did he die? They always want to know, well, what happened? What really happened? How did he die? I don't know how he killed him. But probably by stone or by knife. And I doubt it makes any difference which of those that you pick, either by knife or stone, or you could pick strangulation. Just show him wringing his neck. They'll remember that Abel died then. They'll have a very vivid illustration of the fact that Abel died. How he died is probably immaterial and beside the point. But I don't find anything wrong with creating a story like that fits here under 3A. You're not trying to deceive anyone. You're actually trying to tell them the truth. But you add in a few spicy details to stir their imagination. Okay, that's all I have for this morning, unless you have questions here. And there the hands go up.
Can I bring up the situation?
Okay.
Let's say there's two people, and one party owes this other party some money. So you're gonna hire this person with the intentions of, let's say he doesn't want to pay you your money. So your real intentions are, I'm gonna hire you out, and at the end you're gonna say, give me what you owe me, and you're gonna say, well, you owed me in the first place, so I'm just gonna take it off what you owe me. You don't tell them that until the end. They're under this false assumption they're gonna get paid for their duties. Would that be a deception there, or would it be?
That would definitely be wrong. According to what the scriptures teach, the person who has borrowed money, it is their obligation to pay the money back. It is not the person who loaned the money, their obligation to go and get it. You actually find in the Old Testament account there, in the Levitical law, the Deuteronomic law really, that if someone has something that has been loaned to them, you cannot go inside their house and try to take that from them. In other words, you cannot take it by force. They either have to give it up or you have to suffer the loss, one or the other. But definitely that would be wrong. Proverbs chapter 3. It's the person's responsibility who owes to pay up. Now, if you are the one owed, you are the lender, you can call them, you can ask for it, you can't just say nothing. You can call it, you can try to get it from them. According to scriptures, you cannot try some legal method to get it from them, though. According to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, according to Matthew chapter 5, you couldn't take them to court over that. You can try to get it from them, and if you can't, you suffer the loss. You can ask for it, you can write a letter, try whatever way you want to get, but you couldn't take them to court.
Is that referring to a brother? Or is that
I think
referring to someone?
I think Matthew
outside the
5
church?
would take it outside of the church. 1 Corinthians 6 puts it in the church. I think Matthew 5 would take it out. He's talking in how the principles that are to govern the life of disciples in the kingdom.
I somewhat don't understand the dramatic acting. That part I'm kind of a little bit hazy yet. When you
All
use
right.
that example, the church way back then, I just don't understand how I can make it okay in life, real situations, the dramatic part of it.
Well, in games that you play, as far as the church, stopping the church was concerned, it's more dramatic if you leave people thinking the church is over with for good.
You're just not telling all the truth, is that?
That's part of it, but it's not just not telling all the truth, because I actually created in your mind the fact that the church was not going to start back up. So it's not just withholding part of the truth, it's creating something else. But it's like an acted out parable, like what we find here. You'll think more of it, about it, and the subject will be brought up within a few days or weeks at most to clarify it all.
But it didn't bring any moral hurt to anybody, or, I mean, it didn't hurt anybody, or,
Didn't hurt anyone unless they wanted to be hurt and took offense by something.
but I mean, it didn't, like, kill them or
Right.
maim 'em
Right.
Are there a lot of cases like that in the Bible?
There are a lot of cases that are going to fit under B. There's some that fit under A, a lot that fit under B. And remember what I said a moment ago, that my illustration of the church there fits under more than just this case here. I think it fits very strongly under point 4 as well. We'll see what point 4 is whenever we get there. And then if we need to discuss that some more, we will.
As far as kind of think about the dramatic acting, we all know that movie, The Ten Commandments. But the problem with the movie, the images put forth as far as what the Israelites
Yes.
looked like and that, but as far as the dramatic acting and what took place, that would fall underneath this.
Well, you see, to try to picture any form of the Godhead is blasphemy and heresy. So that would rule that out right away. I don't think you could rule out picturing Moses or the apostles on the same basis, because you couldn't use those passages. I have a problem, as I've stated before, with that, in that if you just put everything there on paper and draw a picture of everything, people's minds don't work at all. You only absorb whatever you see there. But I don't know that I could fault from Scripture drawing a picture of what Moses looked like. I don't know of a verse that I could use to fault that. Because we couldn't say, well, you lied. You really don't know what he looks like. In fact, you don't know what he looks like. But in fact, something was done here that was not necessarily true either. And it was to prove a point. You're drawing a picture of Moses so your child can better conceive what Moses looked like. There, we don't know what he looked like, so how could they better conceive what he looked like? They can better conceive the fact that Abel was killed if you get two people in a play together and have one of them pretend that he's Abel, one that he's Cain, and pick whichever way you want to kill him, and then kill him then. They don't think that you're Cain or Abel. They know that you're mommy and daddy. But they see the actions. They see the actions, not a picture there. But they understand the story that took place without knowing what the faces look like.
And also, with this with the prophet, okay, it's evident God wanted him stabbed to make it look like came from the battle of that. So, in other words, that puts what he said underneath the dramatic acting too.
What he said is going to be put...
Instead of talking in the third part, he put himself right there, that he came from that.
Uh-huh.
So it's basically God sanctioned the acting part of it. Then
And he sanctioned the speaking as well.
Okay.
The speaking is going to go down under here, and we'll discuss that more next time. He sanctions that as well, and we'll have very good proofs of that. Very good proofs of that. It has to be a case that fits under dramatic action. Joshua's case in chapter 8 is not dramatic action. That's a feigned retreat. It's no game there. It's for their life. No one, it doesn't cost anyone anything right here. It's a certain method of illustration.